Hey Bing, how you doing?
Hey, how's it going? Yeah,
I love, you know what? Zooms are crack me up because it's like I'm always looking at like people's apartments. I'm like, this is fascinating. Like I'm
I
just like, ooh,
know.
I'm like, nice apartment you have
I know. Yeah.
there.
Yep. This is, yes, my Brooklyn apartment.
This is
Yeah.
where the magic happens.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, so I'm with the Asian A.V Club, and basically we just love profiling like directors and people that kind of like work behind the scenes, but also in front, like just the stuff that they're doing. And definitely when I knew this movie was coming out, I was like, I need to talk to Bing. This guy feels right. And so if you don't mind, I'd love to kind of like go back before we kind of go into the film, if that's okay. Like I just would love to know a little bit more about you. And you know, I feel like, I mean, you've talked about it many times in the past, but it's just like, can you maybe describe like what it was like growing up, where you were, and then also kind of was there was there something that was really inspiring for you to kind of like even want to pursue filming or just kind of shooting stuff like what was the kind of inspiration that like was the kind of starting off point in you being a creative person basically?
I was born in Beijing because my mom was working there at the time, but mostly she sent me to go get taken care of by her parents in Chengdu in their little apartment there. And then when I was 5, uh, I moved to Tuskegee, Alabama, where my mom got sponsored by a professor to study there. And my mom and dad split up shortly after we moved there, and then it was just me and my mom, and she was just working in Chinese restaurants to pay the rent. And then eventually we moved to LA for a short stint. And then, she was just chasing another Chinese restaurant job there. And then she got another Chinese restaurant job in Rockford, Illinois. And so we moved to Rockford, Illinois when I was 8. And Rockford is this Rust Belt city that, was like 2% Asian, but very working class. And we moved around a lot. I lived in, I think, like 8 different homes in 13 years over the course of my time in Rockford. Um, my mom and I were able to get our citizenship when she married this man who actually followed her home from the restaurant where she worked at, and she had a crush on Richard Gere at the time, and he kind of looked like Richard Gere. And she had a child with him, and they got married. And by the time I was 14, I got my U.S. citizenship. Um, but he ended up being very violent and volatile, which is part of why we moved around so much. Because sometimes my mom and I would move out, sometimes we move back in with him. And it was skateboarding that really kind of helped me get out of that situation emotionally at the time. Otherwise, I think I don't know what I would have done. But I found kind of a whole community of people where I could like go, spend the night at other people's homes and just, find a reason to get out of the house all the time. But within that, I eventually started making skate videos. Um, and it wasn't, at first it was just, yeah, let me point a camera and try to capture the trick. But eventually I met people who were my age who were kind of skate video artists. And they showed me that, oh no, skate video making is a craft. It's a whole genre. There are people who are kind of in the pantheon of the great auteurs and skateboard video making. And so that's what got me initially interested in the creative acts. And in skateboarding, there's just there's a big Venn diagram with artists and skateboarders, that such that I was just around people who were just like making things that make things just because it was it was like normal to express yourself. And I think that's one of kind of the hidden benefits that I got from being a skateboarder.
um I what from making videos for skateboarding that kind of created your career in that sense, in the sense that you started recording them, and then you now have this archive and also you just documented basically. And so when was the transition to be like, oh, maybe I can actually make this into documentary, or like even kind of calling yourself a documentary filmmaker? Like was there that moment where you're like, turns out that everything that I've been doing leads to this this criteria, and I'm just curious if when was that moment for you?
I'd say it was kind of a little bit of a snowballing effect over the course of a few years in my mid 20s. I had been making things that I would just put up in Vimeo. And one of the projects that I was making at the time was this project where I would interview skateboarders about, their families and their traumas and what it was like for them to heal from that. And it was a survey film with skateboarders around the country. But then when I got into this fellowship called Diverse Voices in Documentary, ran by Cartemquin Films in Chicago, where I'd moved to in my 20s, I learned that, oh no, documentaries can be, like I didn't know anything about documentaries. I didn't know, anything outside of just like Ken Burns, basically. So like what happened when I was making skate videos, I was taught, oh no, there is a whole pantheon of great documentarian auteurs, who make these films that are kind of high art in a way that that are universal and they don't have to look like Ken Burns documentaries. I love Ken Burns documentaries, but you know what I mean. And So that's the moment where I decided, like after I watched Hoop Dreams and Harlan County and Stevie, I was like, oh wow, like I want to make a character driven thing. Because I was working as a camera assistant in fiction, like on TV shows and movies. And so I was like, I want to take what I know from, how you shoot fiction and transplant that into this project and just transform it. And so I think the first decision was like, I want to make a documentary, and then over the course of the next few years, with the help of Cartemquin and PBS, I was able to make the film Mind in the Gap, which just slowly got more and more traction, like more like fellowships. We got into Sundance, we got all these awards. And then I think that's the moment where I was like, I guess I'll become a documentarian, And so I was in the union for IATSE, and so I gave up my IATSE card and joined the DGA, and that was the big leap. That was like 2019, I think. Yeah.
Congrats. But like, I always hate, sorry, this is like such a personal thing, but it's just like, it's so weird that you have to like give up one to become another. Like, that's so
Well,
like,
I don't have to. I could have kept both, but it was like it's like with the crew side, like you kind of have to keep saying yes, that's the culture. Otherwise, the calls might stop coming. And I kept saying no because I got so busy with making Mind in the Gap. I got hired to direct a series, to be one of the directors of a series that Steve James is doing in a high school. I just didn't, I slowly had less time. And so I was like, I can't keep paying dues, if I'm not going to be working as a camera person anymore. So. Yeah.
when was, this is interesting because when did you, okay, so now you're a director, and then when the presentation, when they basically when Plan B kind of presented Atticus Lish's preparation for Next Life to your lap, and they're like, "Hey, we'd love for you to like take a look at this." Did they even know that you were curious about moving into narrative, or was that just something that like, how did that even come about? Because obviously you've had you have a very successful career as a documentary filmmaker, and so how did they even have the inkling that they were like, oh, this guy might be really good for narrative?
I don't know. I actually just talked to Barry about this, and what he told me was that he recognized that, there's a lot of different types of documentaries. There's like the Wiseman direct cinema, there's, Maisels with their verite, and then, he saw in Minding the Gap a kind of like I don't, what he said was there was a process that he saw in how I put it together that felt like it made sense for him to ask me to, go to try to make a fiction film. But I remember my first time meeting Dee Dee Gardner of Plan B. I accepted my award at the New York Film Critics Awards with mine for Minding the Gap, and I gave some speech, and then right after I gave the speech, he came up to me and was like, "Hey, my name's Didi Gardner. We have a project for you." So I don't know. I just can only assume because of watching films like Hoop Dreams and Harlan County and Stevie back in the day, and making a decision to make a character driven documentary, that probably led to getting asked to do a character driven narrative. Yeah.
But the fact that, here's this book that has a really, like, obviously, when you're reading it, and invent, like, you see this real connection with your own personal ties with the storyline, and so I'm just curious, what was that like when you read it, and then you started to like imagine, oh, how do I kind of, I don't know, like, how did you personalize it, or how did you kind of approach it? Because there's so many similar there's so many similar things with your own personal life in terms of your mother and all that stuff. And I'm just curious, like, how did you, yeah, how did you kind of like work towards narrowing everything down to make it feel personal, but still tell the story that's kind of was on the page?
Um, I think, uh, well, when I first read the book, I felt like there was this outside, this, there's so many reasons why this character is an outsider. He's an outsider in China, an outsider in the States, and there's, so many reasons why this army veteran is an outsider. He's an outsider, like when he was serving overseas, and now he's an outsider back at home in the States. And I think there was just, a chip on my shoulder, I guess, from being an outsider myself, not feeling like I was understood and not feeling like I was able to ever have a relationship. I didn't have a romantic relationship until my 20s. And I think part of that was I just felt like I had to survive, for so long. And I think these two characters in this book that, I read Preparation for the Next Life, I just felt like I saw that in them too. And so I wanted to display what that kind of relationship looks like, And I saw that not only in my own life, but in a lot of the lives around me in Rockford. These people who just never really got the chance to learn what a healthy relationship is, who honestly didn't get a chance to even be a to get a childhood in a way that was normal. And so I think all of those things play out in romantic relationships. And so I saw in this book a kind of version of the romantic relationships that you don't typically see, but that happen all the time in the world. And it's not always the cleanest looking relationships. It's really messy, and people fall in love for all different types of reasons and all different types of strange situations. And so there's that. But I think what you're referring to with my mom, I think it's the fact that there's just a lot of weird kind of parallels with what happens in the ways in which these two characters fall in love. Like, the fact that like that my stepdad followed my mom home as well, and then that she somehow kind of liked it enough to get married to this man. And the fact that also, there was this choice that she had to make. Do I get married to this person to, who I know is a little troubled, but will provide a little bit of stability in this country for me, And for her, for my mom, it wasn't all transactional either. It was a complicated thing in which she did have feelings for this guy. And so, yeah, I just saw that there was kind of a strange kind of way to tell my mom's story in this book. But to answer your question about how to do that, it was just getting Sebiye and Fred on board, and then recognizing that they just have something special together and that they were willing to um, take the honest route. Like we had an early conversation when we started rehearsing together. I was like, we can do the short version in which we just like rehearse the scenes and try to like make it work. Or we can go the long route and like fully explore these characters like theater. We do nights and weekends, and we just fully commit, go off the book in many ways. And so they were down to do that. So it was just a testament to them too.
To also see Flushing, I live in New York also, and just to see Flushing the way that you shot it is very fascinating. And I'm just curious, like, how did you find this world, that we ended up seeing on screen? Because yeah, you go deep.
Yeah.
It's not just Main Street, and so
Yeah,
I'm just
yeah,
and so if you can talk a little bit about like creating the world of preparation, and working with Auntie to kind of like like to capture the darkness or these kind of weird corners and whatever that stuff like. Can you talk a little bit about that too?
when I first went to Flushing, I was like, I'd gone back to China a bunch, in my life. And when I first went to Flushing, I was like, oh, this is China. Like this is not this feels more like China than America. And I was so surprised and kind of fascinated by that. And so then I was like, okay, well, the book kind of gets even underneath that. And so I started doing urban exploration. I just kind of like wandered into basements and like wandered into kind of back alleys, and sometimes got told, was asked like, what are you doing here? And I was like, oh, sorry, but I got to see that there is, many layers to this community. Um, and when I got Auntie on to who's the cinematographer, why I really wanted him was because he could do two things. He could do kind of sweeping cinematic language with his work in pachinko and worked on a Marvel series as well. But he also has this kind of intuitive photography in which he's able to kind of capture like a very hyper specific place in this kind of impressionistic way, like his work in Blue Bayou. And so, I wanted to kind of incorporate both of those skill sets in him. And so when we wandered and scouted Flushing together, I kind of took him to some of the spots that I'd, kind of already explored. And we just started talking, he's fluent in reading Chinese, which I'm not. And so we just started exploring, and he started pointing out even more details, that were kind of invisible to me, like just the advertisements and the flyers and the pamphlets and the signs and just kind of, little weird quirks that we kind of nerded out on. It was really fun, I think. There's no place in the earth like Flushing, I think, that I've been to. Yeah.
I'm going tomorrow. But actually, I have one really quick last question because I have to go. But it's so weird that I mean, it's not weird, but the fact is, here's a character Aishe who's undocumented, and like these days, it's all over the news, and so it's such a strange prescient film in the way. And even though this book was written a while ago, and even while you were shooting, it was still Biden's era, and so I just, what's it like to kind of put out something that will really resonate with kind of the tone of what's going on these days? Because yeah, it was highly uncomfortable, but at the same time I was like, wow, this is amazing that you guys like captured it like before, I mean before obviously this current situation.
Yeah, I mean, we had no idea what was coming when we were developing and making this film. I think I really hope it brings up the question of, like who gets to have a shot in this country. Still one of the most wealthiest countries on Earth, on the planet. But who gets to have a shot? Who gets to, try to make a life work here? Because a lot of people come here because it does sell a dream. My mom came here and I'm living out a dream. I never would have thought I'd be in the position I'd be able to tell a story like this. But I think the arc of history is long though. And I think part of the reason why I was drawn to this is because there's a kind of evergreen story here about, what it takes to not only try to make a life work in a new country that doesn't, that isn't going to give you a easy pathway here, but how to try to find meaning as well, not just socioeconomic meaning, but kind of a spiritual, emotional meaning, because that's just as important and just as important to living a full life. And I think that's a question that's, I don't know if that's going to be like one of the questions that's this film brings out in this time, where there's just kind of such a culture of fear of the other. Um, but I think in an evergreen way, hopefully it brings out that question as well to the immigrant experience.
Well,
Awesome.
thank
Yep.
you for this film. This is wonderful, and congratulations on everything. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
Bye.
you, Stevie.